So our next topic to cover is colligative properties, right? So there are many different kinds of colligative properties that have to do with concentration, but these properties, some of them are going to be more important than others for us. So I put in this first slide, I have antifreeze as an example in there, right? You can decrease the freezing point of water by dissolving stuff in it, right? Now, to make it a colligative property, you need to have something that you can change, right? Like the freezing point in that case. But it only matters how much of the solute is in the solution, not what kind of stuff you have in that solution. So I can add ethylene glycol to water as antifreeze, but I can technically just dissolve salt in water and it do the same thing, right? So it doesn't matter what it is that's dissolved in that water, it's going to change its freezing point. That solute that's dissolved in the water will elevate the boiling point of that water. So those little tricks that some people have, you can actually put a little bit of salt in the water that you're boiling to make hard boiled eggs, and it can decrease the amount of time you have to cook it because the boiling point elevation of water, adding the salt made that water boil hotter, which makes the cooking happen faster, right? It's pretty simple to understand actually. But otherwise, one major thing that you could take from this slide is that antifreeze in your engine coolant, right? In your vehicle, right? It actually helps you just as much in the winter. Like maybe you're driving in North Dakota and it's -40 and you don't want that coolant to freeze because then it's going to crack your radiator and ruin your engine, right? So it could be -40 in North Dakota when you're driving around, right? Or maybe it's 130 degrees Fahrenheit in, I don't know why I put Celsius on the other one, but technically it's the same Celsius or Fahrenheit, so that's probably why I did it. Maybe it's 130 degrees Fahrenheit in Death Valley, right? So I don't know if you know where Death Valley is. It's a desert that's in kind of California, right? Arizona, somewhere over there in our country. But it gets really, really hot there sometimes. So if you're going to drive through the highway there, which I've done before, you have to be careful that your car doesn't overheat, right? And actually, antifreeze makes that boiling point increase for water as well as that freezing point decrease. So it actually makes the coolant more effective because if the water can boil hotter, it can pull more energy away from the engine. Antifreeze is just as important in really hot conditions as it is in cold conditions. So it might be called antifreeze, but it also should be called anti overheat, right? Whatever you want to call it, because it actually helps in both cases. So, not really big for this chapter what you'd be tested on, but this would be, right? So, osmosis is a big deal in biochemistry. So, if I have stuff dissolved in a liquid, I can affect cells, right? I can have cells that are going to swell up, shrink, right? Ideally, if it's an animal cell, you'd like that cell to stay the same size, have water going in and out of it, but not changing overall. So this has to do with semi-permeable membranes. This has to do with osmotic pressure that we've talked about before, so I don't think I need to talk a whole lot about that. But membranes of cells are semi-permeable, so I'm going to be worried about this osmosis. Essentially, I have these three conditions that we talked about in biology that are important for you to understand, right? So you already can see how the concentrations work out and put those in your notes. But otherwise, if that concentration outside and concentration inside of the cell are equivalent or they're the same, then I'm going to have a cell that is not necessarily, sorry, pen's being goofy, that water will move into that cell, but water will also move out of that cell in equal amounts. There will be an equilibrium, and that cell will stay the same size, right? So we talked about how animals prefer this type of solution, right? They don't want their cells to get too big and blow up because that can actually happen, right? So it's called crenating in your blood. So, or excuse me, if they're going to blow up, it would be lysing, right? They're going to lyse, is what that means when they pop, right? But otherwise, your blood cells could also shrivel up if you had the wrong type of solution that you used in an IV. But isotonic is a perfect solution for animals. Hypotonic, on the other hand, it sucks for animals because what's supposed to happen is more water is going to move in than is going to go out of this cell. And that again would cause that cell to swell to the point where it may lyse, where it may pop, right? And that sucks for animals, but it's actually ideal for plants. Since plant cells have cell walls, right? They actually prefer hypotonic solutions because that gets as much water into that cell as possible. It also creates pressure to help that plant stand upright. But otherwise, animals don't like hypotonic solutions because our cells actually can pop in those situations. Finally, there's hypertonic solutions, and really no kinds of living things like this situation because this always means that more water is going to move out of the cell than is going to come back into the cell. And that always makes that cell shrivel up. And since you understand that you kind of need water in your cells to survive, right, for those cells to function, this is always bad. No kinds of cells actually like this because it's always going to take water out of that cell and the cell won't function without it. So understand which case is which. Animals prefer isotonic, plants prefer hypotonic, right? But in the case of animals, again, we don't like hypotonic because the cells can lyse, they can pop, right? We don't like hypertonic because our cells can crenate, which just means that they're going to shrivel up. Otherwise, plants don't like to shrivel up either, so they're not going to like hypertonic. But plants don't like isotonic because it doesn't create the pressure to help them stand up straight, right? It doesn't necessarily hurt them, but it does hurt them if they need to stand up tall so that they can get to the light that they need to survive. So you're not supposed to put salt water on your plants, your house plants. I think you probably already knew that. You put fresh water on them, which is about as hypotonic as you can get because that's just water, pure water, right? There'd be some new there'd be some minerals dissolved in that water, but in very small amounts. So we needed to talk about that again, but otherwise this is kind of review from biology.